Okay, that's great. Sorry about that. So first of all, thank you all for attending, and thank you for Prince Sultan University for this opportunity to present my research. Before I start, so the title is Learning a Second Language, a Vehicle to Another Self. I want to give you an idea of what I'm going to talk about tonight. Today. So first I'm gonna give you an idea about the contextual background and the relevant theories that I used in my research. Then I'm going to go on to talk about what I hope this research can contribute to locally in Saudi Arabia and globally. I'll talk about the methodology, the emerging results, and the findings and implications. So first of all, in terms of what this research is about, I know the title can be a little bit maybe not clear or ambiguous, learning a second language, a vehicle to another self. What I'm basically looking at is whether when someone learns a new language, whether it's a second language or a foreign language, whether this has any implications on how these people or how this person views himself or herself or the world around them. So basically, I'm looking at identity and the implications of learning a second language on that. And the idea behind that is that when someone learns a new language, it's not only about the linguistic system itself, it's also about the culture. And when you learn a new language, you are exposed to a different culture with its beliefs, lifestyle, and things like that. So to what extent these things can have implications on the person himself or herself. In addition to that, there is often talk about how language shapes the mind with, for example, linguistic relativity theory, the fact that the language that you acquire affects the way that you look at the world around you. So again, this is another idea that links to this topic. So this is basically the idea that inspired the topic of my research. Now, when I talk about the context of the study and the background behind it, when you look at learning English, for example, which is the language that I'm investigating, language has been the global language for years now. It has cemented its status. People speak it all over the world, and there is often talk about how this could be a threat to local cultures, languages, and identities. For example, the idea of the linguistic imperialism and the fact that this language or learning English can impose certain ideas on other cultures and stuff like that. And when it comes to the context of Saudi Arabia, this is especially interesting when you think about the fact that when English started to be taught here in Saudi Arabia back in the 70s, there has been some historical resistance to the fact that if we teach this language, this could be a threat to the religion, to the local language, to the local culture. This idea has faded away a little bit over the years, especially that English is being taught more and more and used more and more. Historically, it was only as a foreign language. It wasn't really used outside of the classes much. But now it's used as a medium of instruction in many universities and schools, also in a lot of companies. So its status has changed. This linked with the idea of the changes that has been going through in Saudi Arabia with the, sorry, I see that there are some comments. So, yeah. So the idea, the 2030 vision and Saudi Arabia opening up to the world, this again, raises the level of the use of English in the society. So it's really interesting to see to what extent this has an effect on the local identity of the Saudi people. When I go on to the theoretical background, when I wanted to investigate this topic, I wanted to look at it in a comprehensive way. So I chose to use the second language socialization theory. The basic idea behind this theory is that when a person learns a new language, they socialize into it and are socialized into it. So the basic idea is that when you learn language through socialization. So through interacting with others in a certain language, you start to learn it. And at the same time, when you socialize with these people, you start to learn about their social system and their cultural system and the way of behaving. So this is basically the idea of second language socialization. I wanted to use this theory because it offers a comprehensive account for all the ideas that are relevant to this study. So it acknowledges the idea of the importance of interaction in language learning. It focuses on the idea of agency and the importance of learner motivation in terms of learning. And it acknowledges the idea of identity and it is, that it is connected to language learning. It also acknowledges the fact that identity is not fixed. It's always changing, dynamic, and complex. And it highlights the connection between language learning and identity. So it establishes that there is a connection between learner identity and their language learning, and the opposite, language learning and its effects on learner identity. Other theoretical concepts that I used in my research that are relevant to my research are, the first one is investment. Investment basically is like a social equivalent to motivation. It looks at the idea of motivation, or the desire of the learner to learn a language from a social perspective as opposed to a psychological one. So it acknowledges that when a learner wants to learn a new language, for example, and is motivated to learn it, it's not only about a fixed desire. Social elements affect the investment or the motivation of the learner. And the fact that when a person wants to learn a new language, they expect something in return. I want to learn this language because it's going to help me in my career. I'm going to learn it because it helps me socially, whatever it is that motivates the learner. But it's there is some kind of reward that he or she is expecting. Another idea that is relevant, which is quite linked to investment, it's agency. Agency refers to the fact that the willingness of the learner to put in efforts and to do things to improve themselves and improve their learning. It's quite linked to investment, but it comes from, it talks about the efforts of the learner in the language learning itself. And both these concepts are related to the success of the learning process and the implications of this process on the learner as a person, how they view themselves and the world around them. Finally, the final concepts that I'm utilizing in my research is the imagined identities and communities. The basic idea behind imagined identities, as proposed by Norton, is that when a person starts to learn a language, he or she has an expectation of how they will be in the future as a result of this learning. And in terms of community, it talks about how when they start learning a new language, they expect to be members or to expect to have membership of certain communities as a result of that, whether this community is local or it's something abroad. So what I'm hoping this research can contribute to is, first of all, when you look at research on language learning and identity, although it has got a lot of momentum lately, it's still mostly focused on how learner identity affects their language learning, and the idea that the characteristics of the learner, to what extent it affects their success in the learning process and their achievement in it. Not much research has been done on how the language learning process itself affects the learner, their sense of selves. This is specifically the case in foreign language settings. So most of the studies have been done in second language settings, where the language is not only spoken in class or in certain contexts, it's spoken in the wider community. So this is why it's helpful to do this research in Saudi Arabia, where although English is being used more and more, it's still considered a foreign language. And another thing that is promising about doing this type of study is in a Saudi context is the difference between the different social and cultural systems between the target language communities, like American or British communities, and the Saudi community. So when a person from Saudi Arabia is learning English and socializing into these societies and cultures, to what extent they're going to have this is going to have an effect on them. Moving on to the research questions, I have 3 research questions. The first one is, how do the Saudi female learners of English as a foreign language view themselves during the learning process? How do Saudi female learners of English as a foreign language view the world around them during the learning process? And what factors influence the learning experience and views of Saudi female learners of English as a foreign language? So the first, basically the first 2 questions are addressing the idea of identity or sense of self by dividing it into 2, how a person views themselves, and then how they view the world around them. This is basically my idea of of identity in more simpler words, because this the concept of identity or the word is quite ambiguous and abstract. So I wanted to put it in simpler terms. And finally, the third question is basically investigating the factors that influence them in the process. For the methodology, I did a qualitative design using a multiple case study. In a case study, I chose a number of participants to focus on. Instead of having a larger number of participants, due to the nature of the topic, I wanted to investigate each learner or each participant in a thorough way. So I had 6 female students from King Faisal University studying at the English department. Having this limited number allowed me to focus on each of them individually and see how the process of learning English affected their view of themselves and the world around them. And then again, because I had 6, it was possible to do a comparison across the participants once I'm done to have a more comprehensive understanding. And I used the longitudinal design. So the data collection started in April 2019 and finished in June 2020. This allowed me to follow the participants over a long period of time, document their learning, their thoughts, and this helped me to document any change if there was change. And this also helped me to minimize process. Research is always, it's not something natural. You're imposing something on the learner or the participant. So when it takes place over a longer period of time, this helps to minimize the effect of the research process on them. For the sampling, as I said, I had 6 participants. So I used convenience purposive sampling to choose them. Convenience came from the fact that I had access to participants in my home university of King Faisal University. Thankfully, they agreed to allow me to do my research there. So this helped me to have access to participants. In terms of purposive, I wanted to choose students who are all female. And the idea of choosing female participants, not only in terms of convenience, but it is also to be able to focus on a certain group and have a certain social group and have a more comprehensive understanding of this group instead of having different genders, and then the findings will be maybe less valid. I wanted them all to be Saudi, majored in English, and one of the criteria was that I didn't want them to have any kind of instruction in English in private schools or institutions. So they basically received basic instructions in Saudi public schools, and this is their first experience in learning English extensively at the university level. I had 6 participants, so I had 2 participants from each levels of the English language program, the 2nd year, the 3rd year, or the 4th year. This again was done to have a more comprehensive with the population. Instead of focusing on 1 year, I wanted to have participants from all the years. The data collection tools were background information form, collecting basic information, semi-structured interviews. The first one was done to get their in-depth understanding of their views on the topic. The second one was to get any clarifications if needed, and to have a member check, meaning that I give them the results or the emerging results from my analysis, and I check with them if this is relevant to their experience to have more validity to the results. I also did diaries, monthly diaries. So every month, the participants would write me a diary, almost 300 words, not less than 300 words, talking about their experience learning English and stuff like that. Finally, I used also field notes to provide the data on the context and the setting. The analysis process was a reflective thematic analysis process in which I did coding to the data. Coding means taking extracts, taking the data, the interview and the diary, and reading it and assigning labels to parts of it according to their meaning or what they're referring to. Deductive coding means that I relied on theoretical concepts and previous studies in deriving these codes. So I did like 3 rounds of coding. The first one was for certain meanings that I'm looking for. The second one was for all the meanings in the data. The third one was for indirect meanings in the data. And finally, I did an evaluation of the codes, and and did a coding table and categorized the codes, arrived at the themes, compared the themes across time, and compared the. Now, in terms of to ensure the quality of the research, using a longitudinal design, triangulation in terms of having several data collection methods, doing member checks, checking with the participants if the results are relevant to them, piloting the study, in terms of the transferability, using thick descriptions of the participants and the setting, and also having a fellow researcher review the things that I've done to make sure that it's valid and it's not influenced by me as a researcher. Now, the limitations of this research, first of all, is the subjectivity. The fact that the researcher is involved in every part of the research in terms of designing the tools, collecting the data, and analyzing the data. It all depends on the researcher. You can't really claim that it's completely objective. Generalizability, having volunteer participants, and the time limitations were some of the limitations of the study. The results indicated, in terms of the first research questions, how the participants view themselves. They indicated that they had more knowledge and culture, they felt more knowledgeable and cultured, they had more confidence in themselves, and they had changed in terms of how they express themselves and their emotions. So they felt more knowledgeable and cultured, and here, this is a quote about that. I'm just rushing it because the time limitations. They felt more confident as English speakers, as people in general, in terms of having knowledge, being capable, useful, and also on the social level. Their self-expression also changed in terms of using more English and relying on English to talk about certain things, certain emotions. In terms of their view of the world, they had more acceptance of others in general. They had more awareness of women issues and women empowerment. And they also talked about the fact that this could have, learning English could have an effect on the westernization of Saudi society and them as individuals. The tables here are reflecting the number of the codes for each participant for each code. Now, the factors that are influencing them can be divided into two groups. The first one is the internal factors like investment, agency, fear, stress, and the external factors, which are the background, type of instruction, the support that they received, and media and social media. In terms of their identity, they said that their identities are fluid and changing. They love to describe their identities as unique and a hybrid between the two languages and the two cultures. So the findings are similar to other studies in terms of the dynamic nature of identity and the effect of investment and agency on language learning and stuff like that. I think that more research is needed on this topic, especially in foreign language settings and in different social groups, not only female. The term identity is quite complex, and this makes the research on this topic quite difficult. And the results of the study in general emphasize that learning English is not beneficial for the learner on the academic and professional levels. It's also helpful for them as people and for their society in terms of growth and development. Thank you all for listening, and sorry if I rushed the results a little bit.
Thank you so much for a very interesting talk. I wish you had more time to go in depth with the results, but inshallah, I think we'll all look forward to reading the paper if it's available at any time, inshallah, in the future. Do we have any questions? I see we haven't received any questions in the Q&A box. Up until we receive any questions from the audience, do you mind if I ask one?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
So I noticed that you focused on females for two reasons. The first reason was convenience, because they're there, so that's much easier. The second reason was you wanted a group that was very much alike, so the results, inshallah, would be a little bit more, let's say, accurate. So my question for you is, do you think if you had male participants, or if you have male participants in the future, that your results will be different? And how different would they be? Because you said the women focused on women empowerment. I'm not quite sure if men would be attracted to the same type of issues and identity images and, I guess, formation. I hope my question is clear.
Yeah, it's quite clear. Actually, I love that you brought up the idea of women, because the idea of having women instead, in addition to the fact of convenience and having a uniform group, I wanted to investigate the idea of language and the effect of language on Saudi female students in particular, because of all the changes that have been going through. I wanted to see if they have any connect anything to learning English as a language. I was expecting actually more in terms of gender, the fact that they're female. I expected them to talk more about the fact that they as women were empowered by English. This was there, and it was one of the themes, but it was more about awareness of women issues, and then empowerment. It was empowerment in general because of the power of the English language and the things that it enables them to do. So I'm thinking that if I did do the study with male participants in the future, hopefully, I think the theme of empowerment will come up in terms of having English as a language of empowerment, even for them. But maybe not the whole idea of women issues and feminism and stuff like that. Maybe it's more relevant to the female participants that I'm investigating right now. I hope this answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. And it would be also interesting to find out about the different topics that might attract the male participants, to see what a Saudi male would be more in line with. Is it women empowerment, or is it something completely different? So it's a very interesting research topic. We have two questions here. So Selma is asking, are there any differences between girls and boys in learning English? I think it's a general question.
Yeah, you would think that there would be some differences. I mean, just because generally, even in studying in general, it's not only in English, sometimes there are differences in the way that girls approach certain things and the way that boys approach them. But in terms of my study, I can't really comment on that because I haven't really investigated anything related to males or boys.
Okay. Salma also added a comment. I think she means in terms of motivation. So the differences in learning, but maybe, as you said a minute ago, since your study focused on females, you don't have the answer.
It's quite an interesting topic to see if their motivation is different. But again, I can't really. I'm sorry, but I can't really comment on that.
Yeah, inshallah, in the future, hopefully, when your study grows and becomes bigger, inshallah, we'll have an answer to that. The second question that we have is, how far does the culture affect the second language learners?
Well, based on the.
So I'm guessing the extent of culture.
Yeah, based on the literature, there is a very strong connection between language and culture. I mean, language is an embodiment of the culture. I mean, it transmits culture, and it translates the concepts and all the things that are relevant to the culture. You can see it in the language itself. So there is a strong connection regardless of language learning. And when it comes to language learning, there is again a strong connection because when you learn a second language, as I said, with the second language socialization theory, it's not only learning about the linguistic system of the language. You start learning about certain practices, certain ways of talking. All these things are related to the culture and to the norm of the society that speaks this language. So when a person learns a language and is exposed to all these ideas, all these practices, it can have implications on them. It depends, again, it differs from one person to another as to what extent this takes place.
And the last question that we have is from Athir. Does language proficiency have an effect? If yes, to what extent?
Again, unfortunately, my design didn't allow me to use or have a proficiency as a factor in investigating this. But from my participants, I had volunteer participants. So you would think that they were more willing to use the language. Maybe they were more proficient in the language, and this is why they were comfortable in doing the research. So my results may be more relevant to more proficient learners, but again, to have a concrete answer, I need to maybe have done a test and chose participants based on their proficiency level in order to be to answer that in a more comprehensive way.
Definitely, definitely. Well, thank you so much for a very interesting presentation. We wish you, inshallah, all the best in your future research endeavors. And thank you, a big thank you to the attendees and audience for asking some thought-provoking questions. Right now, we're going to move on to our next presentation. So we have with us Safa Abdul Halim, are you there? And Hajar Al-Gbashi.
Can you hear me? Yes. Share screen.
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Yeah,
could you
okay.
please share your screen? Perfect.
Okay, shall I start now?
Let me just introduce you, and then you can. Will Hajar be joining us, or is it just you?
No, just me. But she's
Okay.
here. She is
so.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. All right. So our next talk is going to be a paper from Safa Abdul Halim and Hajar Al-Gbashi from Imam Hamad bin Saud Islamic University. The paper and the talk is titled Second Language Acquisition and Acculturation in the Hosting Society, the Impact of Motivational Orientation. You have the floor now.
Okay, thank you. First of all, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hello, everybody. First of all, I'd like to really thank the Applied Linguistic Research Lab at Prince Sultan University for holding such a professional symposium that really brought us as researchers back to life and gave us the chance to share our work and to resume our CPD, continuous professional development. We really appreciate this, especially they held such symposium in an exceptional period of time, COVID-19 that faces the whole world. Hope it will end safely and we go back to the normal soon, inshallah. Coming back to our presentation, actually, our presentation today, or the title that you can see here, is a part of a larger study about second language acquisition, in which me, Dr. Safa Abdul Halim, professor at College of Language and Translation, Imam University, and my colleague Hajar Al-Qubaisi, she is a lecturer at the Institute of Arabic Language Teaching, Imam University. We share the same research interest, which is second language acquisition. She's working on AFL learners, learners of Arabic as a foreign language, and I'm concerned with EFL learners, learners of English as a foreign language. So we try to conduct a joint research studying in depth the process of second language acquisition abroad, those who are learning English abroad and those who are learning Arabic, in Saudi Arabia. So this part of the research that we are going to present today focuses on the AFL learners, a group of multicultural English speakers who are learning Arabic as a foreign language in Saudi Arabia. This is a part of our study. Okay. So before I start, I have to highlight the two key terms that you will encounter in my presentation, which is acculturation and motivational orientation. Acculturation is a process of social, psychological, and cultural change that stems from the balancing of two cultures while adapting to the prevailing culture of the target language. because as I said, we are focusing on learning language abroad. Okay, so the learners are learning the language outside their home culture. Okay, so the second term is motivation orientation. All of us know motivation, according to Gardner, refers to the behavior and efforts individuals exert to pursue learning a second language, as well as their desire to learn that language and positive attitudes towards learning it. But what about orientation? Orientation refers to their reasons for learning a second language. Okay. This research actually, this study aimed to explore in depth the process of second language acquisition, as I said, in a broader context, beyond the classroom. Okay, we're not focusing on those who attend the classes. Yes, they attend the classes, but we try to explore the process of second language learning or second language acquisition outside the classroom. Okay, and we try to understand the language acculturation process in that field. Actually, the primary purpose of this study was to explore language acculturation process. Those learners experience or who are multicultural English speakers learning Arabic in Saudi Arabia. So drawing on Charmander's acculturation model theory and Gardner's socio-educational model of second language acquisition, this study actually seeks to investigate the interaction between social and affective variables, okay, in the area of second language learning. Affective factors represented in motivational orientation and social factors represented in acculturation strategies adopted while learning the target language, and how these factors affect or correlates with the language proficiency level. How they affect the language proficiency level. The motivation orientation, the type and the level of motivation orientation, and the level and the type of this acculturation strategy adopted, how this is represented in language proficiency level. And I have to highlight here the language proficiency level was estimated not based on a standardized test, but by the participant themselves, how they perceive their own language proficiency level according to the daily communication in the society. Though the study is natural, it's basically is a descriptive study, it's also a correlational one, because it also tried to find the correlation between, or the interaction between, a group of independent variables, okay, and on acculturation as dependent variable. It tried to find the effect of motivation orientation, the level of language proficiency, and other socio-demographic data concerning the age, the cultural background, and the length of residence in the hosting society, how these interact and affect the acculturation or the acculturation strategy adopted by the learners. The study actually tried to answer 4 main questions in order to achieve these aims. As you can see here, the first 3 questions were answered directly from the 3 different questionnaires used in this study. The fourth one, in order to answer, we had to do multiple regression analysis to find the correlation between the variables. Before I go on to present the methodology and the results section, I have to highlight a little bit about the theoretical background of the study. Actually, we targeted second language acquisition in light of the post-constructivism theories. According to the post-constructivism theories, actually, such theories, they focus on investigating the relationship between the learner of the target, the second language, and the relationship between the learner himself or herself and the target language, as well as its context. And they focus on the linguistic competence. They see that linguistic competence results mainly from practicing in different social and cultural situations, rather than seeing it just a step that precedes linguistic performance. Also, they support the idea that second language acquisition is not attained inside the human brain only. It mainly takes place through participation and communication in interactive situations, okay, using different cultural tools in a complex social and cultural context. This means that culture, language, culture, and community are inextricably connected and mutually linked. And this has been also had been proved by some studies which prove that acculturation patterns has been postulated to function as a predictor of success in second language learning. So it is a it's a predictor of success in second language acquisition. And other researchers also proved that second language acquisition itself has been reported to be a component of the acculturation process. So acculturation is a predictor, okay, in the process of second language acquisition, and second language acquisition is seen as a component of the acculturation process itself. So as I said here, it's inextricably connected. They are inextricably connected together. The second point I want to highlight, which is second language learning approach. This is a different context, as I said, as learners often are more sensitive to the feelings and expression they perceive in the surrounding environment of the hosting culture. Also, accordingly, understanding the correlation between motives, goals, and acculturation could be essential in the context of learning a second language approach. Okay, this simply means that the more positively oriented and psychologically integrated into the target language community, the more successful second language learners will acquire that language. As I said, this study adopted the Charmander's acculturation model for language 2 acquisition. According to this model, actually, or in this model, Charmander identified two key sets of variables that affect the language acculturation. Here, he identified social factors and psychological factors, which are includes motivation. And Charmander places actually these two factors, both social and psychological variables, on similar scales, lying along a continuum, running from social psychological distance to social psychological closeness with the speakers of the target language. Okay, and pointed that in second language learning depends primarily on the degree of reducing the social psychological distance, okay, between the home culture and the hosting culture. And Charmander assumed that the effect of both factors, okay, is not equal. The social factors and the psychological factor, the effect is not equal. And he pointed out that the effective factors, mainly motivation, having more influence than the social factors. Also, Charmander highlighted 4 different acculturation strategies that the second language learner can have the choice to select or actually use while learning language approach. And it depends on to what extent they adjust themselves to the host culture or the heritage culture. As you can see here, the degree of how they adjust themselves to the hosting culture, if their adjustment to the host culture is low, while the adjustment to the home culture is high, they used to use separation. They used to separate their own culture from the home from the hosting culture. And if their hosting culture is low, their adjustment to the hosting culture is low, and their adjustment to their home culture is also low, they start to have marginalization. The model 1 here is when their adjustment to their hosting culture is high and their adjustment to their home culture is also high, they used to have integration. Coming to the methodology of this research, as I said, though it is descriptive in nature, it's also correlational. Okay, and the researchers here adopted the mixed method approach in conducting this research in order to get more in-depth and more clear data. We applied 3 questionnaires and semi-structured interviews. As for the participants of the study included a sample of 50 female bilingual English-speaking adults learning Arabic as a second language in Saudi Arabia, mainly in the Arabic Language Institute in Imam University. And they were living in Saudi Arabia as family members, and they have different cultural backgrounds. As you can see here, we have the sample from Europe and from America and from Asia, and their age, they have a variety. The category of their age ranges from 20 to 50, with a larger number from 30 to 39. Okay, as you can see, this will be significant in the results. Also, the length of residence it ranges from the majority ranges from 1 to 5 years. We have 36. As for the data collection instruments, as I said, we used 3 questionnaires: multiple motivational orientational questionnaire towards learning Arabic as a second language, acculturation model and scale of language acculturative stress, and semi-structured interviews. I want to highlight that these questionnaires were designed by the researchers because we didn't adopted a certain questionnaire, though we tried to adapt some items from other questionnaires. That's because most of the questionnaires, especially in acculturation, were conducted on immigrants or refugees, which is totally different from our sample. Coming to the results of the study, answering the first question about the participants' motivational orientation, as you can see here from the table, the general level of their motivation was moderate. Their motivation towards learning Arabic as a second language or the foreign language, the general level was moderate. Concerning the type of the motivational orientation, we found that it was integrative more than instrumental. They were integratively oriented to learn the Arabic language rather than instrumental. They were learning Arabic not to get a job or to have an academic degree, but they were interested personally to learn the language. Participants' language acculturation level and strategy in Saudi Arabia, it was found that the level of acculturation level was a moderate level. And concerning the type of the strategy adopted, it appeared that they adopted separation strategy, because actually they were more adjusted to their home culture than the Saudi culture. So they adopted the separation strategy. As for the acculturative stress they feel in their language experience, all participants reported that they don't experience very much stress in Saudi culture context, with the majority of participants reported a little acculturative stress. As I said, we did a multiple regression analysis, and the main results of this was that as follows. The results revealed that general motivation as well as integrative motivation levels had the second strongest positive correlation with language proficiency level. Only age and cultural background, which refer to nationality, had a statistically significant effect on the acculturation. As for cultural background, mainly Europeans got the highest correlation, followed by home Americans and Japanese. Why Europeans? This can be referred to what Charmander called social distance between participants' home culture and hosting culture. We know that European community is much more preservative communities. They are religious, and they give a high priority for family bonds and relations and their religion. So they turned out to be to some degree more preservative, like the Saudi community, okay, rather than the Americans or the Japanese. A surprising result actually here, the length of residence was not linked to the language acculturation process, as previous research has shown that the integrative acculturation is linked to longer residence periods. But again, this can be attributed to the complexity of the Arabic language itself as well as we see from the data from the when I presented the table about the participants, the majority had only from 1 to 5 years residence in Saudi Arabia. Coming to the qualitative results of the interview, according to the results of the interview, while most of the participants reported that their main motive for learning Arabic is to learn colloquial Arabic varieties and use newly acquired vocabulary in straight, informal, authentic situations, some participants reported that the aim to learn standard Arabic to read the Holy Quran. So they have here, they have reflected a common problem concerning our common difficulty concerning the teaching and learning of Arabic language as a foreign language, which is the dual use of the Arabic language, which we call it diglossia. Choosing between colloquial Arabic and standard Arabic. Therefore, it's essential actually for Arabic ASL courses designers and teachers to find ways to increase learners' exposure to the two varieties of the Arabic language in a balanced way to meet their real needs. Because actually, they are taught in standard Arabic in the classroom, but when they go outside the classroom and communicate in daily life, they actually they feel they cannot exhibit their ideas in the colloquial Arabic. We have a point here to highlight qualitative results versus quantitative versus qualitative results. There was a little bit of contradiction between the results. Quantitative results of the language acculturation scale, as I said, indicated that participants were, without exception, still more adjusted to their home culture as a kind of social isolation. Yet, findings contrasts with the qualitative data of the interview, where participants said that they expressed their willingness to integrate in the Saudi culture and their interest to get involved in the Saudi culture and learn more about it. And actually, this contradiction is explained by Kim, who declared that during the process of acculturation, people with multicultural background might tend to develop what he called identity flexibility. Okay, they in order to adapt and get involved in the culture, they try to develop a new identity, which is called identity flexibility, to get themselves closer to the target language or the hosting society, and reducing what Charmander said, the psychological and social distance, and come close to the target language culture. Also, bilingualism can be considered as a variable in enhancing participants' expertise in language acculturation in the Arab society. Actually, when during the interview, we discovered that they have a nationality, some participants, but they have lived in different cultures. So they have a multicultural background, and they master more than one language, and this, of course, helped them to get involved in the Saudi culture as a new culture for them. Okay. Implications and suggestions for further research. Actually, effective implications concerning the importance of developing second language learners and teachers' intercultural competence and the cultural diversity is an important point to highlight. We have to focus on highlighting intercultural competence and cultural diversity in teaching and in learning. We have to get the learners themselves to be aware of the importance of these 2 points in language acquisition, as well as teachers to integrate them in their classroom. As for further research can be conducted with larger sample, of course, using different predictors, such as gender, because we focused only on female because of convenience. We couldn't access the male sections. We tried our best, but we failed to get enough sample. So it's recommended for future research, and also they can involve the identity type or language identity as one of the variables. Also investigating the degree of cohesiveness to the hosting society by language to learners and how this affected their pragmatic competence and needs more research, either for EFL learners or AFL learners, actually, as I said. And that's all. Do you have any questions?
Thank you so much for a very interesting talk. I must say it's quite refreshing to see the focus on the Arabic language as the language learners choose to focus on. Most of the research we see every day focuses on English. So alhamdulillah, seeing some studies on Arabic is quite refreshing.
Yes, actually, I was very interested to join Hajar in this point, actually, and to get me interested in the topic. Yes.
So do we have any questions? Please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box so Dr. Safa can address them. So Dr. Safa, may I ask you the same question I asked before? I noticed that you also focused on female learners.
Yeah.
Do you think your results would be any different with male learners?
Yeah, sure. As I told you, actually, in our first draft of our proposal, we involved both genders, and we were very interested to discover the difference between male and female learners of Arabic and English as a second language. But actually, we failed to reach the target sample because of the culture, especially here, especially in Imam University now. So we couldn't get the target sample. So we limited ourselves to female. But actually, from my readings before, when I was writing our first proposal, actually there are a lot of researches highlighting some key differences between male and female learners of second language. But not, we have a limited research concerning those who are studying abroad. So it was a very important point to discover. So I put here in my future research suggestions for others. If a male researcher is listening to us now, I encourage him to try to target this point and do a similar research on male. Yeah, I found
why not have a collaboration? Why not invite
I
someone
tried.
from
I
the
tried, my
male
dear. I
side?
tried. Yeah, I tried, but I failed. Actually, I have to be honest. But if someone is
difficult,
willing, if someone is interested, I'm willing to participate. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we have a question in our Q&A box.
Yeah.
What future research do you believe this would be beneficial to? A research you might do to get a bigger picture of the study?
Of the same study?
I believe so.
Yeah, actually, it's a very good question, actually. As I said before, it's a part of a larger study. This research is just a part of a larger study which focused on the main question which led the larger research project was, what are the factors that affect second language learning abroad? And it compared between EFL learners and AFL learners. This is the larger project. But if you asked me if I'm gonna continue my research interest in this area, I would like to explore in depth, okay, the effect of learning language abroad on a learner's identity. Yes, language identity. I would explore it in detail.
All right, perfect. So another question we have here, how did you design the questions to reflect the specific motivation and orientation?
Yeah, actually, as I said, we try to design the research questionnaire items in light of the research questions, number one, and referring to related research questions of similar research articles, but we try to adapt it to the to the Saudi culture and the characteristics of the learners being multi-cultural. They have multicultural backgrounds. So we try to make the items more declarative and more, including, sometimes we include some examples in the item itself to make it more informative and to be more clear for them. We didn't adopt a certain questionnaire. As I said, we try to tailor the items to be representative and to be to get more information from the participants. Yeah, we adapted the items to make it more and added some examples to some items. And by the way, yes, it was written in English, as I said, for them because they have maybe 3 different languages. We translated the questionnaire into English, okay, as a lingua franca. All of them they know English, but with 2 cases we had to translate it into Indian language because they don't know English very well. They cannot read English. They can speak English, but they cannot read it. So we had to translate it into Indian language.
Oh, I can only imagine the amount of work that went into this project.
You cannot, yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I believe we don't have any more questions. Okay, so we have one last question before we move on to the next speaker.
Yeah.
As you have mentioned, all participants are learning Arabic because they're interested in it, not for academic or professional purposes. My question is, do you think the results would change if they have another purpose, academic or professional purposes?
Yeah, sure. It will be normal. If we have participants who are interested to pursue their academic degree or to have a job or something, the results of the motivational orientation questionnaire will change. In our study, it proved to be integrative. But if we have those who are interested in extrinsic motivation, the results will go towards the instrumental motivation. And I think this actually, from my point of view, it will affect also their acculturation strategy. They will be more, they will adapt, they will try to take the adaptive strategy towards the hosting society. If they are searching for a job or something, they will try to adapt more. They will not take the separation strategy as proved here in our study. They separate between their home culture and the Saudi culture. If they are going to work, they have to to make assimilation or integration. They will adapt assimilation or integration strategy. Yeah, I expect this.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much for a wonderful talk and for answering all our questions. Shall we move on to our last speaker for this paper session?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Juwairiya Siddiqui, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. And please forgive me if I am not. Correct? Yeah, okay. All right, perfect. Okay. So could you please share your screen?
Sure. Oops, so question slide. Can you see it?
All right. Yes, perfect. Okay, so our last talk for this session, inshallah, will be by Juwairiya Siddiqui from Carleton University. Her talk is going to be titled Exploring L2 Motivation of Arabic Learners in United Arab Emirates, a Complexity Theory Application. So the floor is yours.
All right. Good afternoon, Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for joining in today. My topic will explore the motivation of second language learners of Arabic, mainly in the Gulf, but I'm doing my fieldwork in the United Arab Emirates, so my study is based here, but this is very well applicable to Saudi and even the other Arab regions. So let me begin by giving a bit of context to what the study is about. I grew up in Saudi, in Riyadh, and I am a non-native speaker of Arabic, and I did not learn Arabic growing up for various reasons. And then when I moved to the United Arab Emirates, I see that the same thing was with the students here, like the non-native speakers. And this was despite the fact that they had Arabic in school. So when I was studying Arabic in school, I did not have Arabic like a ministry subject back in the day, at least. And when I see that the students here had it compulsory, mandatory, right from grade 1 all the way to grade 9, grade 10, and still they were, I would say I was still able to speak a lot more than they were able to. And that got me wondering, what is happening? Like, you're living in an Arab country, you have a fair amount of Arabic speaking people around you, and you study Arabic for religious purposes in school for academic reasons. And you also, a lot of people in the UAE stay for quite some time. Like, I would say they go to school, they go to university, and then they get employed here as well. So there is that long-term instrumental motivation, as Dr. Safa mentioned, about integrating into the community, not necessarily with the language, but then always having that thing that, okay, knowing Arabic is an advantage. So what is really the issue? And when you start exploring, this is what comes up. Lots and lots of boxes, lots of things to unpack. And you're left wondering, what is the issue? Is it the curriculum? Is it the policies in the country? Or is it just that the non-native speaker is not motivated enough? Now, when we think of second language motivation or second language learning, there are multiple factors, right, that contribute to the learning. It could be the classroom experiences, the interaction with the non-native, or like with the Arab community around you, the kind of feedback you get from the teacher in the classroom, how involved are the parents in your learning right from childhood, etc. Now, with all these things going on, when you look at second language motivation studies for English, because that's dominantly where a lot of research has been done for second language, or even foreign studying second languages and foreign languages, you see that a lot of focus has been given on the identity of the learner by itself, which isn't wrong, so to say. But when you are looking at a language in context, in a place where you're surrounded by the language and you're still not able to gain proficiency or a basic amount of proficiency, you have to look beyond the identity of the individual. And that is what my study is planned. Okay, give me a second. I will have to Right. So what is the purpose of my study? It's to understand why do non-native speakers have a low level of proficiency in the Arabic language. That is where the study started, or like the idea stemmed out of. And I wanted to look at motivation, not as intrinsic, extrinsic, not as integrative, instrumental, but more like motivation as a system. And this is where I bring in I would say a non-applied linguistics approach into applied linguistics, and that is called the complexity theory approach, where you study motivation as a system with different factors which are interacting with each other. And it's not just a student is motivated or not motivated, something along the lines of it being dynamic. So, and how do we do that? By assessing their immediate learning environment. These are the research questions that I've laid out for my doctoral study that I'm doing right now in the United Arab Emirates. The first thing I'm exploring is, what attitudes of motivation in language learning do second language Arabic learners and educators in the UAE hold? So, like, what that is to say that the students themselves, they have some idea about why they're learning Arabic. It might be academic, it might be because their parents are forcing them to, but there are a couple of reasons. And how different is that idea against or in comparison to the educator's idea of why the students are learning? So that basically brings in not just the learner, but slowly, as you can see, it's bringing in the context, the learning experience of the learner. And the second half of my study will set out to explore the different motivation styles. I could call it the archetypes, and I will explain in a bit how that would potentially look like at the end of my study. And in applied linguistics, as you must be aware of, Dormier's second language motivational cell system. Again, it has these three essential components: the ideal self, the ought to self, and the L2 learning experience. Just I think 2 years ago, Don here presented this study on how the learning experience is like the Cinderella of motivational study, because there have been so many empirical evidences and so much empirical work and just theoretical work done for the ideal and ideal self and ought to self, because there has been theories that can support that kind of that framework. But when it comes to learning experience, theoretically it all seems good, but there hasn't been much done in action. There's no application of how do we measure learning experience, or how do we contain, because everything is, if we're taking learning experience of a learner, that's too many variables around the learner himself. So I'm combining Dornier, so this is the theoretical framework, motivational self system with a core focus on learning experience with complexity theory. And how do I do that? Again, first of all, going into exploring the learner's immediate learning environment. So taking in the viewpoint of the educators, the administrators, the school admin, the parents, etc. All of those experiences built into the second language learner. And I do this by using research methods which are built in complex dynamic systems theory research. The next slides will explain how that will work empirically, but a little bit more about complex dynamic systems theory. It's also referred to as CDST. And CDST is essentially a theory of change. How do you record, or how do you capture, or how do you consider emerging changes in a complex system? So over here, if this is too abstract, our complex system is the language, or say the motivation of our Arabic second language learners. And in this case, it would be the non-native Arabic speakers in UAE or in Saudi, in Kuwait, etc. Now we know they are trying to learn Arabic. They have so many things around them, which are all factors that can influence each other. How do we capture that and understand the different shades of motivation styles? And I explore that further by basically providing a conceptualization of learning experience is actually a dynamic ensemble. It has all all the factors of a dynamic systems theory can be explained in a second language learner's learning experience. This is the major, like the two phases for my study. And I have already started out with the first part, that if you see on the left, the research question, what attitudes about motivation and language learning do Arabic learners and educators hold in the UAE? And this section, the first phase, is basically to prove. That's the part where I'm actually saying, yes, learning experience needs a theoretical framework, and CDST is my appropriate theoretical framework of choice. And this is how I prove that. And in the second phase, taking that idea of fusing complexity with the motivation, Dornier's to motivational self system, I go out, I go ahead and find out the different motivational styles. So in phase one right now, I am in the statement data collection phase, where I'm working with a school in Ras Al Khaimah and a school in Sharjah as well. I'm collecting some data from the students that will be prepared, and then the students themselves will sort the data to create concept maps. Now, what is a concept map? That's a research method within CDST, complex dynamic systems theory, which helps us conceptualize how complex, like how can we use complexity tools to study second language motivation. And this hasn't been done before specifically for second language motivation, but there have been 1 or 2 studies which have used it. And this is what potentially it will look like. So I create 2 maps, if you can see, one for the student and one for the educators. And then you see which areas, when you start comparing the 2 maps, we will potentially see what the difference is in terms of what students think is their idea of studying motivation or Arabic, and what's their idea for learning Arabic. And do the educators have the same dominant idea, or is it something different? And that can tell us a lot about what is happening in a classroom environment, for example. And the second phase, and this is a very interesting part of the study as well, I mean, apart from the first part, is the tracing signature dynamics of the motivational system. And this applies a very different, again, what should I call it, research method. It's called retrodictive qualitative modeling. Maybe I should just go to the next slide just to give you an idea of, so it's something like this. You have the learners, and it's from bottom up. So you have the learners, and then from the learners, you try to identify 4 or 5, depending on how many unique factors we can score in, the core archetypes. And then from there, we interview them further to understand what basically, in depth, what are their learning experiences that have led them to reach this stage of motivation. So if you look at the study here, this will be done through focus groups, and then the focus groups will help us narrow down the specific motivational archetypes. And then you have a questionnaire for identifying core students from each archetype. So that would mean, say for example, I have 5 prime archetypes. I would want to interview a specialist in each archetype, right? That kind of a thing. And that way I developed, it's called like developmental trajectories. That is basically understanding in detail the profile of that learner. And so this, if you look at this developmental trajectory, this is a sample for teacher immunity. And this is just to give you an idea of what it will potentially look like for second language learners of Arabic. So you have different stages. So every learner also goes through these stages, where there's a stage where they're initially exposed. In complexity, it is called the initial exposure or the initial conditions. And then they go through different phases, and the system basically settles down into these states, these attractor states. Those states could be motivating or demotivating, but essentially these are states that no matter what the system goes through, or like the learner goes through, they keep heading back to that attractor state. So say a perfect example of this would be a second language learner decides to enroll in an Arabic course. 3 weeks in, feels like he or she is not progressing, and then tries to come back. And he's like, oh, you know what? At least I can read the language. At least I can just like read the scriptures. I think that's good. That's good enough for now. And then after a few more years or a few more months, they decide, okay, let's roll in another course. And then again, they keep going back to that comfortable space where they feel, okay, this is good enough. And at the end, they feel like they're not really progressing. So that could be one type of motivational style. And I don't want to generalize the types, but that is what the study at the end aims to do. So in teacher immunity, they have brought out things like a teacher could be a spark plug, a visionary archetype, a fossilized, a defeated. And I'm aiming to get archetypes typical to motivational styles of learners. And this section, this is what is the developmental trajectory, which tells you what were the initial conditions of these motivational styles. How do they cope? How do they change? What kind of identity do they adopt? Some of them are very, like some learners, if you see when you talk to university students, some are just like, oh, you know what? It was just for my academic, for my school. I'm done with it, done and dusted. They don't want to learn Arabic anymore. Some of them still have a higher aspirations. No, I think I will be able to do something successful post-university, things of that sort. And yeah, and so going back to the 2 phases, so these 2 phases together will help me look at motivation of second language learners of Arabic, not just again as one variable, motivation as a variable, as a criterion variable, but more as a system. And I do that by applying complex dynamic systems theory research methods. The 2 main ones that I'm using will be concept mapping and retrodictive qualitative modeling, which basically starts from where the person already is, the outcome, back to how it all started. And yes, so that's about it. Right now, as I said, I'm in the first phase. The first part, I'm in phase 1 and doing data collection. And the rest is yet to come. I would like to hear from you on this. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much. That's quite interesting. It seems like you are tackling a big question, motivation, and it's not an easy one. It's not like English, where it's you might be able to answer the question more easily. With Arabic right now, and especially when you're dealing with the standard versus colloquial Arabic, there are a lot of things going on there that need unearthing. So I think you have quite a task ahead of you, but super interesting, to be honest. I can't wait to see the final results, inshallah, and see what you uncover. Do we have any questions?
Yeah,
Yes, I believe we do. Okay, so this is a bit of a long one. I asked college, so this is from one of our attendees. I asked college students in English department after I felt that their results in some special English subjects are low, and their answers that they are not interested in learning literature, linguistics, and translation. We want to learn English as it is for the purpose of normal use of the language. So their interests are not in specialization language subjects. Do you agree that study plan for English colleges should focus on providing the students with necessary skills rather than these curriculum?
Right. I think like based on if I have to answer this, and it's a really interesting question based on how if they are not motivated to learn something in a for a specialization, should it just focus on general vocabulary? Is that what I understand? Just the necessary skills. And I think a lot of universities in the West have that kind of vocational training where you have English for academic purposes, and then you have English for specific purposes, and students are free to opt for that. I mean, if their background, I would say, is technical and they're doing it for specific purposes, then it makes sense for them to learn those particular terms, right? And yeah, I think that's all I could say in terms of them having to learn a question like that, or learn subject that they're not interested in. And giving it in context of Arabic, that's generally what happens. A lot of students here study Arabic language in school with topics that they feel are not something they can make use of, and maybe that's why they're not able to retain it either, right? And I agree with you when you mentioned that yes, it's a big topic, and that's why I'm not really exploring a lot of things in it, but more specifically just the learner's motivational styles. I just really want to know, okay, we know like this is the system, this is what's happened, people have been learning for different reasons, and right now there are different types of learners. So I want to know what are these, like they can only be a finite, like a complex system dictates that even though there are a number of possible scenarios, there are only finite number of core possibilities, and that is what I'm aiming to look at, those core 4 or 5 maybe core motivational dispositions. Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, you have to start somewhere, right? To tackle the big problem, you have to tackle the small ones too, right?
Sure.
Inshallah, yeah. So any more questions? Do we have any more questions? All right, so we have one question here. Do you have a rough idea of the recommendations that this study would bring to the table for educational systems in particular?
Yes, definitely. I think that is like the aim of the study, if I have to say, like to really get into, like, give teachers that kind of blueprint, right? Like when they can, if they are able to, like, say if I develop a questionnaire by the end of this, because that's what will happen, right? If I get these 5 core motivational styles, and then that questionnaire goes to, say, classroom teachers, and they use it in their classrooms, and they get an idea of, okay, what is the motivational disposition of a majority of the students, and that helps them intervene in providing the specific type of interventions, or what should I say, the kind of intervention that the teacher needs for that particular age group. Because sometimes it might happen that a lot of us are focusing on, like, say, for example, meaning focused input, so a lot of reading and a lot of writing information, reading and listening, for example. But then if the students in the classroom require more of speaking skills, then this kind of framework blueprint gives the teacher a better idea of, okay, what kind of children are in my classroom and what should I really focus on, right? So it has a direct application, definitely, yeah, in the education. Yeah.
Do we have any additional questions before we wrap up? Okay, I guess not. Okay, so thank you so much for a very interesting presentation. We wish you all the best, inshallah, with your PhD journey. And thank you for taking the time to present and answer our questions. And we have reached the end of this session. I want to thank everybody for attending and remind you that the plenary session, inshallah, will start at 5:15. Professor Janet Altariba will be presenting a talk titled Learning a New Language, Fundamentals and New Approaches. It will start at 5:15 in room 6. We will come back here to this room at 6:30, inshallah, for the workshop. We have a K-SALT TESOL workshop, inshallah, that will start at 6:30. Thank you so much for attending.